Victorian poetry. Today we shall discuss Elizabeth Barrett Browning as a Victorian poet. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, born in the year 1806 and uh, died in the year 1861, was a prominent Victorian poet. She is known for her passionate and personal poetry. Her poetry often explores themes of love, social justice, and individual rights. Some of her most famous works include How Do I Love Thee, also known as Sonnet 43, Aurora Lay, and Sonnets from the Portuguese. She was a strong advocate for women's rights and abolition, and her poetry often reflected her political views. She was married to Robert Browning, another famous Victorian poet, and her relationship was a source of inspiration for much of her poetry. Her poetry is characterized by its lyricism, intensity, and use of classical forms. She was one of the most popular and influential poets of the Victorian era, and her poetry continues to be widely read and studied even today. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was a pioneer for women's writers. She was a pioneer for women writers and paved the way for future generation of female poets. Her poetry often explored themes of identity, morality, and spirituality. Elizabeth Barrett Browning is also known for her use of symbolism and imagery in her poetry. Her poetry has been praised for its beauty, depth, and emotional power. We have prescribed the cry of the children in your course. Let's talk something about this text, a very significant voice. When we look at literature with a cause, with a purpose, when we talk about literature for the sake of life, we do remember Elizabeth Barrett Browning's The Cry of the Children. This poem was published in 1842, and the poem highlights the plight of child laborers in mines and factories. The poem is a passionate appeal to the society to address the exploitation of children. Browning, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, I'm referring to, Elizabeth Barrett Browning argues that children are being robbed of their childhood and their rights. She emphasizes the contrast between the natural world, where children should be playing, and the harsh reality of their work lives. The poem uses powerful imagery and symbolism to convey the suffering of the children. Browning has also discussed, she has illustrated the themes of social justice, morality, and the role of society in perpetuating these injustices. The poem is written in a lyrical style with a strong rhythm and rhyme scheme, which adds to its emotional impact. The Cry of the Children is considered a landmark poem in the Victorian era social reform movement. Elizabeth Barrett Browning's this poem, The Cry of Children, helped raise public awareness about child labor and contributed to the passage of laws regulating child labor in Britain. This is a very significant poem, as I told you, from the perspective of children's rights, from the perspective of human rights, from the perspective of social injustice, and many more issues. So let's think, let's focus on this poem from different angles and make some research questions. We can look at the historical context of the poem, understanding the social, political, and economic conditions of Victorian England and how they impacted child labor. We can also see the issues of biographical influences, examining Browning's life and experience that may have influenced her writing of the poem. Also, we can see the poem from the perspective of literary devices, looking at the use of imagery, symbolism, and other literary devices to convey the poem's message. We cannot say that, we cannot deny that social reform is not there. We can look at social reform from the perspective of investigating the poem's role in the social reform movement and its impact on child labor laws. Moral and ethical implications are also there. We can see that delving into the moral and ethical questions raised by the poem and its relevance today. You can also look at this text from a viewpoint of comparison to other works. Other works, you can see, you can find some works of that are illustrating the issues of social justice, that are illustrating the perspective of children's right. The poem has also, it is full of cultural significance. We can see that examining the poem's cultural significance and how it reflects Victorian values and attitudes. Feminist perspective is also there to look at. We can see Browning's role, the role of Elizabeth Barrett Browning as a female poet, as a woman poet, advocating for social change. Poem is full of contemporary relevance. Investigating, we can see that investigating how the poem's themes and messages remain relevant in contemporary society. So, the poem "Cry of the Children" is, you can see different song sequences are there. Different. It shows the concept of literature. It looks at literature with a purpose, with a cause. You can see that how the poem is giving a different picture of Victorian England, Victorian literature, that all is not well here, and how the society that is shining from one perspective has a darker vision also, has a darker side also, and we can have so many research questions. So I advise you to read the poem, read the text, and find out your own version. Happy reading.